Everyone, I'm here on the west side of the city of Binghamton at 22 Clark Street, where today I'm announcing my safe housing and code enforcement plan for the city of Binghamton. These are priorities to revitalize Binghamton's neighborhoods by cracking down on slumlords, helping families that are living paycheck to paycheck, and supporting longtime homeowners who are neighborhood anchors. Frankly, it's time to start treating slumlords like we do drug dealers. Too many of Binghamton's working families live in substandard housing owned by bad actors who are not intent on fixing their deteriorating properties. It's not only tenants that suffer, but bad landlords hurt entire neighborhoods. Residents deserve to live in safe, quality, affordable housing, and neighborhoods should be free of blight and full of integrity and character. This plan builds on the progress we've seen the last 7.5 years to move Binghamton towards its goal. So here we are today on Clark Street. We are literally steps away from one of the elementary schools for the Binghamton City School District. We're a block away from Recreation Park, and we have a vacant, boarded up, blighted property, 22 Clark Street, which is owned by Isaac Anzerroot, Binghamton's most notorious slumlord. The fact is that more resources are needed from the city in order to combat these bad actors, these bad landlords who own dozens of properties across the city of Binghamton and have no intention of fixing them up or allow them to deteriorate and hurt the neighborhoods around them. My safe housing plan will tackle these issues specifically from a number of different ways, again, focusing on enforcement of the derelict properties, but also supporting the good homeowners, the good neighbors who've lived in this community for a long period of time. So chief among this is the creation of a new attorney position at City Hall to prosecute slumlords and lead a housing integrity task force. This position will be solely focused on prosecuting code cases in city court and holding accountable slumlords and serious repeat code offenders. The attorney will also lead a new city task force, which will focus on enterprise-level investigations of unsafe housing conditions and persistent blight. The attorney may also make referrals for criminal prosecution or to state enforcement agencies. Right now, the city has very talented attorneys who work on not just code enforcement cases, but a variety of water hearings. They sit and support city council, they sit and support the planning and zoning boards, but we need really the resource of a dedicated attorney to prosecute these cases. With new changes in Albany for discovery, that also applies to code enforcement. So there's been more of a burden that's been placed on City Hall, and it's time we give them the resources. We also need to hire new code and building inspectors to boost the resources in the city's code enforcement office to handle growing number of complaints and shrink the geographic area that each individual code enforcement officer is responsible to. We must deny building permits to property tax scofflaws. That means adopting a new local law based on a law that's in Seneca County, New York, that requires applicants for building permits to provide proof that the property is not subject to delinquent taxes. So that means slumlords will no longer be able to stiff taxpayers while renting out units, generating income, but never paying their taxes. Of course, exceptions may be made regarding occupied units for life safety issues, but we need to be strong, we need to be firm on these slumlords that fail to fix up their properties. The other thing we want to do from a transparency and an accountability standpoint is make code violations and construction permits searchable and available to the public. We have new municipal software that will allow us to do this. Residents can stay informed about what's happening in their neighborhoods, as well as stay up to date on and be able to track the repeat offenders across the city. So what will we be doing for existing homeowners, existing anchors of our neighborhoods? We have to invest in first-time homebuyer programs to bring new young families, young professionals, folks who graduate from Binghamton University and SUNY Broome Community College to stay in our neighborhoods, to stay in the city of Binghamton and invest in properties. We also have to invest in a very successful senior home repair program, which is a partnership with the First Ward Action Council to help seniors fix up their homes, everything from a leaky faucet to front steps, new windows, making it compliant if folks are in a wheelchair so they can stay in their homes. We don't want Binghamton seniors who have lived here for decades, who have paid taxes for decades, to move elsewhere because they can't afford to fix up their home. We want to keep them here. We have to expand affordable housing opportunities. This means new units of safe, quality, affordable housing in the city of Binghamton that can also serve as an economic development engine for distressed areas and provide those new units of affordable housing. Finally, we should directly fund the Broome County Land Bank. The Land Bank gets funding from the state of New York. There's some administrative funding that comes from Broome County. The city needs to step up and support the land bank so they can continue to do rehabilitation of foreclosed and vacant properties and turn them into safe, affordable housing. 124 Gaylord Street is a great example on Binghamton's east side. That was a property that had numerous crime issues, code violations. The Broome County Land Bank fixed the property, and now a first-time home buyer, a new home buyer, will be in that property. So in terms of the plan, that is my plan. In terms of my track record, at City Hall, we've worked with various developers to advance affordable housing projects. Canal Plaza, the Front Street Gateway Project, Crandall Street Revitalization Project, North of Main Part 2, the Family Enrichment Network's Homeless Housing Project on Liberty Street, and Greater Opportunities North Side Project, which is happening right now. I've also, since 2014, served as a board member at the Binghamton Housing Authority, which utilizes funding directly from HUD to manage 640 units of public housing and more than 800 housing choice vouchers. So this is a plan that will bring Binghamton neighborhoods up. It will hold slumlords accountable, and in knocking on doors across the city, that's one of the #1 things I hear from city residents. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. I've got printed copies of the release as well.
In terms of the code inspectors, roughly how many does the city currently have? How many do you propose adding?
We have roughly 6 code enforcement officers, and I can get you an exact number. I know we have one of them is out on medical leave, but I would look to add 2 to 3 new code inspectors across the city. And where they would be deployed, obviously, would be something we'd have to look at, but that's a rough number.
It seems to me, whether it's acknowledged and affirmed or not, that most people look at code enforcement in Binghamton as largely being complaint driven. That basically the only time they roll on a location is when someone has lodged a complaint. Is that how you think code should be approached? Is that how you would approach code?
I think that certainly the complaint process is what drives code enforcement, because once the city is notified of a potentially unsafe condition, we have to act immediately. The proactive nature of code enforcement, code sweeps, we've done in the past. We've been engaged in proactive code enforcement, but a lot of times it comes down to personnel or resources. I think what people want to see from code is not just that a violation is issued, but actually someone is prosecuted and that dangerous condition, that high grass, that chip paint, is actually brought into compliance. I don't think Binghamton residents care about the bureaucratic behind the scenes. They want to see an issue in their neighborhood resolved as quickly as possible. And I think that will be done in addition through these additional code enforcement officers, this housing prosecutor as well.
When you say deny building permits when there's outstanding taxes, is that they would deny a permit if there's outstanding taxes on that specific property, or deny the permit if that owner has outstanding taxes anywhere in the city?
That specific property. That specific property, yep. And you can imagine a situation where one entity has 4 or 5 different LLCs, so it could only really realistically be applied to that single property.
In terms of how some of these quote-unquote slumlords build up their inventory, I'm sure plenty of them are through private sales that governments can't really get involved in. But when they're buying at county auction, and again, it's the county that runs that, not the city, but would you like to see some sort of vetting, some sort of setup where there was a way to exclude known slumlords from adding to their portfolio at auction?
Jim, I believe there is. I think Broome County Real Property, and it has gotten better, I think, over the last several years. But there is a vetting process, and someone like Isaac Ansrud, I don't believe is allowed to participate in the county auction. I think that the issues with the county auction, I know I've talked about it, the mayor has talked about it, Mayor David, is that too many of these properties are auctioned. More work needs to be done to identify future uses. It's from a rehabilitation standpoint to give more properties to the land bank, more properties to our partners in community development, because when properties are auctioned off, really the public, the residents of the city of Binghamton, lose control over what happens to those properties. So as you said, I would say a majority of these happen in private sale and there's no control, but more needs to be done to divert properties away from a tax auction and into a program that can help redevelop them.
The mayor's budget included refunding one code enforcement officer position, but we are only back to pre-pandemic levels of staffing in that office. Your plan calls for adding more code enforcement officers. Why not do it in this budget?
Sure. So as I said, some of what I talked about is sort of my track record on it, and then other aspects is kind of a plan for the future. We're going to get that additional code enforcement officer and then see how resources are deployed. One of the other things I'd like is for these new officers to work in tandem with the attorney position as well. And we still need to work out details of how exactly that will function. There are many different funding sources, including grant funding, that could pay for those. So before utilizing local tax dollars, we need to explore all options in terms of how those things can be paid for.
What details do you have to explore since this is refunding a position that already existed a few years ago?
In terms of the new code enforcement officers, I'm not saying that on January 1st of next year, add in multiple officers. I'm saying that it could happen over the course of several years and done so sustainably.
Chris Schleider has previously said at a forum a few weeks ago that he would like to see a lot more than 2 officers in that department. Have you consulted with him on this plan, and what else is he trying to get done in that department?
Sure, and so obviously Mr. Schleider is a civil servant, so he operates that department. I think in hearing from him, having this prosecutor position is a very important piece of it. Code enforcement is more often than not code inspection. The enforcement actually happens in city court. So that's the most important thing to I think city residents, is to actually see a result that comes from these, having someone that's held accountable. If you look at the data from code enforcement services the last 10 years across the city of Binghamton, the neighborhoods that have received the most code inspections also are still the neighborhoods that are the most distressed. You don't revitalize a neighborhood just by code enforcement. You do it through investments in infrastructure, through investments in housing, investments in public safety as well. So we can't code enforce our way out of it, but from a resource standpoint, to support that new prosecutor position, we need these additional resources.
Is one attorney enough to handle housing issues?
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think that as of right now, probably. But one of the things that I talk about is about 20 years ago, and maybe a little bit more than 20 years ago, local law enforcement, the Broome County Sheriff's Office and the metropolitan police agencies saw this issue with narcotics in our community and guns in our community. What was created was the Special Investigation Unit Task Force. These were resources, officers that weren't doing patrol, did not have other responsibilities, to focus on narcotics in our community. And what has happened over the years is that task force has grown, it's added officers, it's added expertise, and that sole focus on narcotics and guns has yielded really good results for public safety in the city of Binghamton and across Broome County. I want to replicate that model, but with slumlords that are doing the same type of damage, frankly, to neighborhoods, with derelict properties, putting people in unsafe housing. So this is just the start, but there's nothing that says that it cannot continue to grow as we move forward.
In terms of Binghamton Housing Authority, you sit on the board. Canal Plaza is beautiful, and I know there's talks of Canal Plaza too. But what do you see as the future of the large complexes at Carlisle and Saratoga? I'm not going to suggest they're unsafe, but they're getting old and, quite frankly, rather run down. And then there's sort of a national debate over whether or not those sort of projects style of housing is really an appropriate and place for people of low income.
Mhm.
What would you see in terms of the future of those places? Renovate them as they are, demolish them and replace them with a new model? What do you think is going to happen with them?
That's a really great question, Jim. And you're right that I think the 1960s approach to, sorry about that, the 1960s approach to housing, which is to build projects and concentrate poverty, it obviously does not work, right? So in terms of Saratoga and Carlisle, HUD has millions of dollars that's available in capital upgrade programs where housing authorities can upgrade those facilities, can look at different types of housing that takes place there. Maybe it's not the facility, maybe with some upgrades, but the style of housing. Housing vouchers, for example, which are very popular, which are always funded by Congress, they have bipartisan appeal, that type of thing. But yes, the next 10, 20 years for the Housing Authority will mean renovation of their downtown, east side, south side buildings. And I think also an investment in more wraparound services. One of the things that we worked on was bringing in Cornerstone Family Health, which is a type of healthcare provider made really possible through the Affordable Care Act that takes all types of insurance and provides healthcare services for residents who live at Saratoga. That's a great example, and that's a great example of bringing services to people where they live. So the capital infrastructure investments there, as well as wraparound services, will have to happen at the Binghamton Housing Authority in the next 10, 20 years.
I know you obviously mostly talked about kind of code enforcement, but do you have any plans to maybe help protect residents when it comes to rent prices?
Rent prices?
Yeah.
So not at this time. New York State passed legislation, I'm sure if it was last year or the year before, regarding providing a rent stabilization authority to cities outside of New York. I do not believe that the city of Binghamton met the metrics that they require in order to enact something like that. So that's kind of a moot point in terms of rent stabilization.
Kind of to bounce off that question, broadly speaking, is density something you're in favor of, dense housing projects and development?
Sure. In the sense of this is that if we can provide, whether it's mixed income housing, market rate housing, affordable housing, in mixed use applications, that is really has to be the focus. Working with neighborhood business districts on Main Street where we have some empty storefronts, having vibrant businesses where there's housing on the second floors and above, and commercial retail on the first floor. That makes for really walkable communities for folks that don't have a car. It makes for safer communities and should be what the city is focused on moving forward. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The city's housing services department, I got that title wrong. The line under there, the temporary services line, was I believe $30,000, and that has been completely reduced in the budget the mayor proposed last night. Can you explain why exactly that is?
I'd have to look at exactly the budget line you're speaking of. I'm not sure exactly in the department you're speaking of. I'd have to take a look at the budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the mayor, including in his budget address last night, kind of labeled a number of constituencies with regards to people who are advocating for housing in the ARPA debate before City Council as special interests. Do you agree with his characterization of many of those activists who've been speaking at City Council meetings as special interests?
Well, I think that if they're advocating on behalf of a specific nonprofit or a specific activism entity, then yes, they would be a special interest. Special interests also include folks that we work with very well, as I mentioned, those community development providers, opportunities for Broome, I guess it's called Greater Opportunities now, First Ward Action Council, et cetera. But I think the key here is that when it comes to affordable housing, we need to focus resources and support the programs and institutions that have a track record of getting things done. And that's what we've done, and that's what I believe that the city should continue to do. Again, the First Ward, the Family Enrichment Network, these are folks that are providing really, really good services and programs and housing for some of Binghamton's most vulnerable residents. They know how to do it, and those are the folks that we should be supporting.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the searchable database for code violations. Chris Schleider said a few weeks ago that exists now. So why not make that public now?
Well, so we have the software in place. It's called Municity 5. So the capabilities of the software are in place. To actually roll it out to have a public portal does take some more time and some more applications with our IT staff. We want to make sure that we're not sharing non-public data in terms of folks' private cell phone numbers that maybe our code enforcement officials have, which are included as part of a case file. So when a query is done, we want to make sure that we're only sharing the information that could be made available publicly.
My last question involves, I can't recall if it's town and country these days or country town because they switch back and forth, but it just seems like everyone familiar with that situation says it's deplorable, and yet it goes on, and there doesn't seem to be anything that government can do about it. What can be done about places like Country Town and the terrible living conditions there?
Sure, and it is incredibly unfortunate what's happening at Country Town. I think that you have a management company that does not care. I think you have problem tenants that cannot be evicted. And you have, again, that concentration of a lot of these issues in one place. The city wants to work on a redevelopment plan. We've announced previously a developer that is very interested, but given the scale of that project, we have to have a combination of state, local money, federal low-income housing tax credits. It takes time, and that's how these projects have to happen. I don't believe that there's a future with the current owner, and we need to work as quickly as we can to get new ownership in there and new investments. But it is very frustrating. When you look at it from a public safety standpoint, it's very frustrating. We have many incidents there, and I feel for the residents who've lived there for a long period of time, who have raised their families there, and it went in waves. I think there were some improvements, maybe from 2015 to a couple years ago, and then again, it has gone downhill again. But I believe that there should be no ownership, and we're working with the state of New York to put together a deal to get that done.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay.